Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Roadmaster base plate on a 2023 Jeep Gladiator. When it comes to flat towing your Jeep Gladiator, there's going to be 5 main components that are going to be required to safely do that. The first one is going to be on the vehicle side, being the base plate. That's going to structurally mount to the frame of the vehicle and give you the mounting point for your tow bar as well as your other components. Your tow bar is going to be the connection point between that base plate and the hitch on the RV. And just like a trailer, you have your safety cables. That's going to keep everything together just in case things were to accidentally disconnect. Now you're also going to need a braking system. Today we have the Stay and Play Duo, which is a fixed system. Whether you have a portable or fixed, it doesn't matter. You're going to have a breakaway switch. And this is in case everything was to fail. It's the last line of defense. It'll pull this cable, and that's going to put the brakes on the vehicle, allowing it to come to a stop. That way it's not rolling down the road. We also have our diode wiring, which is going to transmit the light signals from our RV to the taillights on our Gladiator, giving us the running lights, turn signals, and brake lights. Now you may want to add a few other things into those components as well, and that would be a charge line, which is going to allow you to trickle charge the battery as you go down the road, and that's just going to tie into your 6-pole. Now we also picked up a stoplight switch on our Gladiator today, which is specific to the Gladiator. It's just a bracket that mounts a plunger on the brake pedal, and that's going to give us the indication that we're braking. Not all braking systems will require that, but if you are doing the Stay and Play Duo, you're going to want to pick that up. Jeeps are some of the most commonly flat-towed vehicles, and there's a lot of different options when it comes to base plates, and this one might be my favorite. Roadmaster does a fantastic job of having great fit and finish overall throughout all their products, and this one is no different. Now this one is a little bit different than some of the other ones that have a beam that runs across, whereas this one goes directly onto each individual frame rail, and it makes installation that much easier, and also the amount of trimming required is not really that much. It also is a very huge benefit on their mounting of their 6-pole bracket that also allows us to get our breakaway switch in place, because they allow you to have spacers and hardware to bolt up to the factory spots, which really takes away a lot of the guesswork on having to mount up any of your components. When normally just driving around in your vehicle, it actually has a pretty clean look overall. Everything stays pretty well recessed, and the good thing is your safety chain loops don't stick out too far, and you have your receivers that are pretty far recessed, so you get a nice clean look overall. And when you are ready to flat tow your Jeep, you can grab your arms and simply twist these into place, and then they lock in. Being that it's a Roadmaster base plate, the style of hooking up is going to require the Roadmaster specific pins. So if you get a Roadmaster tow bar, it's going to work great. But if you grab a different brand, whether it be Blue Ox or eTrailer, you can actually pick those up with the Roadmaster ends. Just make sure that you're getting the specific pins. That way you can get those pinned up. Measuring from the ground to the center of our arms, it's coming in at 15.5 inches. And that's going to be important when setting up your flat tow setup, because not all RV hitches are going to be the same height as the base plate, and you want your tow bar within 3 inches of that height, and that way it stays level while towing. And if your hitch is maybe too high or too low, you may need to look into a high-low adapter that's going to set the tow bar at that level height, and that way you can get that nice safe tow. So you can measure the hitch on your RV, compare it with that measurement, and determine if you need one or not. When you are ready to hook up for flat towing, it's nice. You just go across the base plate and hook up all the components. So first we'll get our arms in place. And Roadmaster, being specific with their pins, allows you to slide this through and pin it in place. So just align that hole, put your linch pin in, snap that down. We'll then hook up our safety chains, our diode wiring, our breakaway switch, once you get your other safety chain and your other arm attached, you're ready to get your vehicle set up in flat tow mode and hit the road. And when it comes to the installation, this one is actually fairly easy. You are going to be removing your rock guard and trimming that out before it goes back on. Your bumper is going to come off, and just a few minor small pieces. Now there's a little bit of drilling required, but it's pretty straight shot. You're just enlarging those holes. And there's going to be some interesting hardware that you maybe have not used before, like a handle nut. But if that's the case, no worries. If you're slightly mechanically inclined, follow along and I'll show you how to get it installed. But if you watch the video and say, maybe this isn't for me, maybe you don't have the space, the tools, or even the want to get this installed by yourself, you can use eTrailer's dealer locator to find someone close to you to get this installed. But for those DIYers at home that are going to be tackling this themselves, follow along and I'll make sure you get your base plate installed. Now, before we begin our installation, I do recommend having a nice organized spot to keep hardware. We're going to be reusing a lot of the hardware when we put our bumper back on and also while we're getting our base plate up. So to have it nice and organized makes it that much easier to get everything together. And starting off, we're going to have 2 plastic push pins that are located in this little trim right between the bumper and the grille. And it's recessed here. There's slots on each side, so I'm using a trim panel tool to just pry up that center portion. And then the rest of the plastic push pin generally comes with it, but if not, make sure that you get both pieces. A flathead screwdriver also works to accomplish this. We're going to have a few more plastic push pins, so having a trim panel tool definitely helps, but in all those cases, a flathead will work. Now, underneath the bumper where our rock guard meets it, there's going to be a bunch of knockouts here, and that's going to give us access to the plastic push pins that are located up here. They're a slightly different style than what we just had up top. So just kind of, again, pry on the center and you'll be able to pull the rest of it out. It's going to look like this. And you'll see that they start here. Just go to each location and get those removed. Now also on our rock guard, we're going to have 2 bolts. These are going to require a 8mm socket to get these removed. And we can set this rock guard aside. We're going to be trimming on this a little bit later. So for now, we'll just kind of put this off and we can trim it all out at one time. Now we're going to remove our brace that we have across here. And this is going to require a 16mm socket. We'll go ahead and get these removed. And then we're going to be trimming this out. Basically what we're going to be doing is cutting this to where it's still going to have a mounting point eventually to get our rock guard put back on. But it's going to make space for our base plate. So as soon as we take this off, we'll take it over to our vise where we can start cutting this out. And these tabs just kind of interlock here, so you just want to lift this up and then this will slide out. Now I've used painter's tape to kind of just line out where we're going to be cutting and just go a little bit above this mounting point. And then you can see the kind of triangle corrugation, just kind of run that down. And the tape just makes sure that we have nice and consistent clean lines. As far as cutting this, I'll be using an angle grinder. If you have a Sawzall or a Dremel, that'll probably also work. Just make sure you have your safety glasses on, and we'll go ahead and get these notched out. Once these are cut out, I'm just going to knock off some of the burrs here. And since we have raw metal that we just exposed, we want to make sure that long term it's going to stay protected. So if you have a little bit of spray paint, I would go ahead and paint that. You can also use a paint marker. It's kind of up to you here. But this will help kind of make sure that it's not going to corrode or rust long term. While our paint's drying on those, we can kind of move ahead by, we're going to be removing our bumper. And before we do that, we do need to unplug the fog light harness. That's located on the passenger side frame rail. You'll see there might be a little bit of tape on here. So just peel that back until you can gain access to our button that we'll need to press. And if you need to, you can actually slide this out. There's a plastic push pin tab if you need a little bit more leverage. But once you push that tab in, we should be able to separate these. To remove the bumper on your Jeep, you're just going to have a series of nuts on studs that are located on the outsides of the frame rail. So you'll have 2 nuts on each side, so a total of 8 that we're going to remove. It's going to be an 18mm socket. So I'm going to loosen these up by hand, and then I'll come back with a electric ratchet to make a little bit quicker work of this. With the nuts removed, we should be able to get our front bumper off, and the best way to do that is grab a hold of the tow hooks and just kind of wiggle this back and forth. Sometimes the tolerances on the studs where they slide through can be a little bit tight, but we should be able to get this loose, and we'll set this aside. With the paint dry on our cut brackets, we're going to go ahead and get these in place. We're going to be using new hardware included in the kit, so make sure you're using that. And we'll just get this tightened down. And I normally just kind of align it with that weld there, and it's just a 17 millimeter socket to get this tightened down. Next, we're going to go to each side of the frame, and we're going to be removing these bolts. They're going to be a 16 millimeter socket, and these attach to the frame stiffeners. Will not be keeping the frame stiffeners on, as the base plate lives right there. So once you loosen it up, you can actually just slide these out, and then we can remove the hardware after. Now you might want to hold on to these if you ever plan on taking your base plate off and reverting your vehicle back to a non-flat toed vehicle. You'll need these, so it's up to you. If not, if you're going to keep that base plate on there for the lifespan of the vehicle, you won't need these anymore. At this point, you're going to want to grab a 9/16 drill bit, and I recommend grabbing one of your longer bolts. We're going to be drilling through this hole to enlarge it, so having the bolt ready to just kind of test fit to make sure it's fitting through nice and clean. Once that's drilled through, we'll just go straight perpendicular across where there's going to be another small hole, and you can keep it nice and straight. Just make sure you enlarge it all the way through, because eventually our bolt will run through this hole. So we'll go through and get these all drilled out. Now, I've ran into something that I've never seen before. I've done lots of base plates on Wranglers and Gladiators, and normally you'll have the hole on both sides to enlarge. Ours doesn't on our passenger side, which is kind of strange. So if yours is in this configuration, just a little way to help you make sure you get it lined up properly, you can use the base plate, kind of raise this up in position, and then with the factory frame stiffening bolts, we'll just kind of align this up. And that's going to give us the template to be able to mark out where we need to drill. So if yours doesn't have those holes, I would recommend putting those frame stiffener bolts in line here, and then also make sure that these front ones are kind of aligned, and then we can make our marks. Now we're going to get our base plates in place, and you're going to want the 2 bolts that we removed from our frame stiffeners. That's going to kind of hold this in place for us, and these just slide into place. And just make sure that you slide it up enough to where we can get these threaded in. So sometimes they can tighten up. You may just need to take a dead blow hammer and kind of knock those into place. And then also something else you can do is try to get these aligned up front where they go through the mounting points. And the best way I've found to do that is if you grab a 3/8 extension, you can utilize that to kind of move it around and also hold this in place as we start our hardware. Now we're going to grab our long bolts and a flat washer. We're also going to have these pipe spacers and potentially some spacer washers. And what we're going to be doing is sliding our bolt from the outside in, and it's going to go through this top hole where we drilled it out. Now, sometimes you'll have variances where you'll need a washer or 2, depending on the tolerances as you slide them through. But just know if you're putting a spacer washer in on this side, you're going to need to do that for the remaining of the hardware as we get this in place. Ours worked out pretty well to where we really don't need that washer. So we'll pass this through. And then we're going to finish that up with a flat washer, a split washer, and then a nut. Now we're just going to leave this lightly tightened right now, and eventually we are going to want to go back and put some thread lock. But to get everything kind of holding in place, we'll start by doing this one. The next thing we're going to do is repeat that same process on the hole that's in this area. So just pass those bolts through. Now we won't have a pipe spacer there, it's just going to pass through. But if you did use that washer up top, make sure you slide one in between. And what I found is if you take a piece of tape and just kind of wrap it around and leave this edge open, generally you can slide that down and get it aligned to where you can pass your bolt through. And with those in place, we're going to grab our handle nuts and our bolt with a split washer and a flat washer. And this, our nut plate is going to slide up through here, and we're going to look for it on this hole. So you may need to put some bends in so you can feed the hardware in. And Before we do that, I am going to put a little bit of red Loctite on here. It's going to be really hard to go back and redo this one. So what we'll do is I like to slide this up and try to get some visual on it. And then you can make your bends as necessary. Just make this as square as possible. That way it's easy to thread in. Now, it can get a little bit tedious here, so just take your time. If you need to make a few more extra bends to get this exactly where you want it, go ahead and do that. Now, once your hardware is in place, don't tighten it down because we need to make sure that our bumper beam can go back in place, and then we'll be able to torque it all down. So this tab here we'll leave on here, and don't over tighten it. I just took a 3/4 inch, or I'm sorry, a 15/16 socket, and just by hand kind of made sure that that was threaded on properly. Before we get any further, I am going to take off the nuts on the other hardware that we had and just put a little bit of thread lock on there, and that way when we tighten it down, it's going to be ready to be torqued, and it's going to stay in place long term. Now, before we get our bumper in place, to help it along, what I'll do is grab that 3/8 extension and again just kind of run it through all the holes to make sure that those studs can go through evenly. And on the outside corners, for whatever reason, these are a slightly smaller diameter, and that's where you kind of run into issues. So if it's not aligning, or if you want to make it a little bit easier, a burr bit, I just kind of go through here and grind the hole out to make it a little bit easier to slide in. It's up to you. If you can get your bumper to go in without drilling it out, then by all means do that, but I'll go ahead and get ours enlarged. Now, before also getting your bumper on, you need to check to see if you need to trim anything out. Sometimes on the fog light cover or the bezel on the backside, it'll be notched down here. It's got kind of a corrugation. If that's the case, you will need to trim that out to give ourselves clearance to be able to get everything put back in place. I found that the ones that are the straight edge like this, you really don't need to do anything. So if you have that other style of bumper, go ahead and get that cut out according to the instruction manual. But for our sake, we're going to just put our bumper back on. And using the tow hooks to kind of guide it in, you may have to shimmy it a little bit, but it should slide in. And what I use as a reference is those plastic push pins that were moved at top. You should have the holes align, and then you'll know you're in a good spot. So at this point, the nuts that were removed from the backside of these bumper studs, we'll go ahead, put those back in, and get them tightened down. The first thing that we're going to be tightening is going to be our 16mm bolts that we got from those frame stiffeners. So go ahead and get those snug down first. Now, don't be surprised if the outside nuts are a little bit tighter because of the base plate bracket, but once you get everything tightened down, now we're going to grab our torque wrench and a 3/4 inch socket and wrench combo, and we're going to torque down the 5-inch bolts first. The torque settings are going to be found in the instruction manual, and we'll just go through and get these torqued down first, and then we'll come back, and for our handle nuts, that'll be a different torque setting. Once you torque down the handle nuts, to get the tab off, you're just going to simply move this around and it'll break off that weld from the plate and you'll be good to go. Now's a good time. We can go ahead and plug in our fog lamp harness. Now we need to trim our rock guard out to make room, obviously, for our base plate. And I use painter's tape in the instruction manual to create our template here. I'm going to be using an oscillating tool, which works really well on this to get those nice clean lines. And the paint really just gives you a good reference to follow. We may need to trim out more as we go, but this is a good first step. We can always trim out more to get clearance, but we'll get this cut out and take a look at it. Now with that cut out, I find that I have a few spots just right at the corner of the base plate that it's going to cause just a little bit of tightness to be able to get everything bolted back up. I'm also going to go back with a file and just sand all those burrs down just to kind of get a nice clean edge. With everything fitting properly, I got it all trimmed out nice and I filed it down. We're going to get ready to put this back up. So grab your 8mm screws or 7mm screws that we pulled off and most of the plastic push pins. So what we're going to do a little bit different is these two that we have, I'm going to omit those plastic push pins because we're going to be putting our breakaway switch and 6-pole mounting bracket that's included in the kit. We're going to be using those factory holes, which is really nice. Now, you don't have to put it here. It is lined up to either be on this side or this side. What I would recommend is take a look at your RV, figure out where your 7-pole is located, and try to match it on the same spot. That's one less cable that has to cross over. So we'll go ahead. We'll first slide this up and get some of our plastic push pins in. And for the screws, if it's not completely aligning, mine actually worked out pretty well here. But if they're slightly back or too far forward, you can bend this tab to get that to align. So go ahead and do that. It's really nice of Roadmaster to have this bracket. Some of the other Wrangler base plates that I've done, it really makes for an interesting time trying to get this mounted up. So this bracket, again, our 6-pole is going to go here. You can also use this for your breakaway switch, or if you have an Air Force One, you can put the fitting there. But it's going to go into place. We have the long bolts. We just put a flat washer on there. We have our pipe spacers. And this will allow it to slide right up into place here and get mounted up. We have a nylon lock nut that we're going to put on the back side. So I recommend sliding these up. And when you hold that in place, we'll just go on the back side and I'll get these started. To get this snug down, we'll just use a 9/16 wrench and socket. Now also don't forget your plastic push pins that are on top, but other than that, your base plate's officially installed. And when you're going to run your 6-pole wiring, what I like to do is grab the 6-pole plug and run it into this slot and figure out exactly where those wires are going to come through, and then you can drill a hole and run all your wires through there. It'll give it a nice clean look. So overall, not too bad of an installation to get your base plate on. Hopefully this video helped you get your base plate installed, and if you have installed it yourself, definitely leave some comments or anything that you might want to share along with other people in the comments. That way we can make sure that we get the best installation possible, and it helps us make our videos that much better for other neighbors with Gladiators. My name's Brad. Thanks for watching the installation of the Roadmaster base plate on a 2023 Jeep Gladiator.